All right, welcome to another Leaving Young Earth Creationism, this time with Seth. Thank you everyone for coming. Sorry about being a little bit late there. There were some tough technical difficulties. But Seth, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Seth, and I'm from the U.S. Midwest, Kentucky, actually, pretty close to the Ark Encounter. And I guess this is my story about leaving Young Earth Creationism.
All right. So about how old were you when you became a Young Earth Creationist?
Well, I don't know exactly. My parents are Christians, and my dad always had the idea that, well, we couldn't have evolved from monkeys because there are still monkeys around, but that was about it. When I was a kid, though, he took me and my siblings to see a speaker. I don't know who it was. I don't think it was Hovind. It might have been one of the Morrises or something. But anyway, we saw a Creationist speaker, and my dad was I think everybody was kind of bored by the presentation, but I loved it. So he took me back to the next two follow-up, and we picked up a book. It was a little bit over my head, though. I was probably around 10 at the time, if I had to guess. And a few years later, I picked it up again and read through it. And it was the Noah Flood book, I think, by Henry Morris.
Oh, the Genesis Flood. I had that on my shelf.
There we go. Yep. And anyway, so I read through the book, was just fascinated by everything it said in there, and it seemed so convincing. And that was really the beginning. And then I got into some reasons to believe stuff, but seemed a little bit off in some of the things they were saying. And then I found Answers in Genesis sometime early high school. And since then, I've been pretty much committed to that position up until really the last year or so.
Okay. Oh, so this has been a fairly recent thing that you've been getting out of.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a process. I'm in certain respects. So, yeah, I figured when I was recommended to reach out to you, I thought, this is all fresh in my mind. I have the fire in my soul right now. I probably should reach out about this. So,
okay, and we got in contact via what was it? Someone on Facebook or?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the guy who recommended it now, but we're in a Facebook group about answers to Answers in Genesis. So,
right.
And I was voicing some of my frustration about my experience with them.
Okay. All right, cool. So, I guess you were about a year younger than you are now when you got out. So, I don't want to ask something that will too obviously reveal your age unless you want to. But because normally I then ask, how old people were when they got out.
Yeah, I've got 3 decades under my belt.
Okay. So now one thing that I found interesting was you are a former Answers in Genesis employee, right?
Yes. In fact, this orange signage thing is one of the old signs at the museum they took down, and I liked the backing, so I took it home.
Okay.
But yeah, I worked there for just shy of 3 years. I quit about a month before I would have hit my 3-year anniversary.
Okay. And what did you do for Answers in Genesis?
So for the first 6 months, I worked in guest services at the Creation Museum, and it was just a part-time thing. But then I got hired in September of 2016 doing point of sale work, which is kind of a branch of their IT department, but they focus on just the sales equipment, building products and tickets and coupons and things like that for both the Ark and the museum. So when I got that position, I moved down to Kentucky to be right in the middle between the two.
Okay. And so you had to sign their statement of faith, right?
I did, yes.
Okay. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Answers in Genesis is a 501c3, aren't they?
I believe so, yeah.
So how do they get around the requirement that they not have religiously discriminatory hiring practices outside of public-facing roles?
I don't know for sure. I was never employed by the Ark Encounter, so I was actually employed by the nonprofit AIG, and I didn't really invest myself too much in that aspect of what was going on until after I left. it just wasn't something that I really encountered too much and didn't know a whole lot about. They don't really make a point of discussing it
Right.
with employees of my level anyway, as you might imagine.
Right. It's just always confused me because let's say someone wanted to get a job, like, I don't know, sweeping up for like American Atheist or something. American Atheist is a 501c3. You can't say, well, you have to be an atheist. You have to sign our statement of lack of faith.
Right, right.
Because
And the thing is, I knew people who were there who weren't creationists, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. And I don't know if I knew anybody who was an atheist or not a believer, or of some other religion. But there were a couple of us, like including myself, who during our tenure there went into more of a Messianic Jewish tract. And while that was never a serious issue, like they would have fired us over it, there were definitely some people in the organization who did not like that.
Okay. So maybe there's not an official rule about it, but there seems to be some kind of pressure to be in a certain subset of Christianity, I guess.
Yes. I had a friend who, on his own personal time, had made a Facebook post against a particular soteriological belief. And he was challenged by somebody in the ministry, even though it's not even a statement of faith issue they make. And he was like at risk of losing his employment for a little while over it. So they're really weird in what stuff they actually focus on to get fired up about and which stuff they let lie.
Interesting. So it seems like the statement of faith is sort of like the bare minimum, but there's a lot of pressure to be even more kind of conforming to what it is that, I guess, is it Ken Ham? Is he the sort of standard for what is theologically okay at AIG? I
don't know for sure. I made a point in like trying not to interact with him as much as I could, to be honest. But I mean, he has a presence about him that is, you might imagine, a little bit intimidating, and so you never want. I never really wanted to be in the area where he was working. I would say for the theological stuff, in the case that I know of, or the cases, I should say, none of them were apparently instigated by him. That was all other people in the ministry. And I don't want to get into any names or anything.
Okay. So that does actually make me wonder, because on the rare occasion that Ken Ham is actually on Answers News, which is becoming more and more infrequent now, he always seems like the kind of person I wouldn't want to work for.
Yes.
He always seems very disparaging of his other employees, including his son-in-law, and like the PhDs he has, even the PhDs he has working for them. So is that fair? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you don't know.
Well, I'll tell you how I first met him, and this will be a good explanation. When I first moved to Cincinnati, I'm originally from Illinois, and when I first moved to Cincinnati, I was going to one church with the family I was staying with, but there weren't a lot of young people there, so I decided to look around at different churches, and I came to one in a town about in the middle between the two attractions, and he happened to be speaking there that day. So after the show, I went up and walked up to him, and I was so excited to meet him. And I said, "Hey, Ken, I've just started working for your organization. I really enjoy it. I'm glad to be here. I think this is a great church, seeing that you endorse it and are speaking here." And he just kind of blew me off and walked off. And it was really weird. I was taken aback by it. And my next interaction with him probably wasn't until about a year later. And it was the same kind of thing. He didn't remember me at all, which, I mean, I get that just because there's so many people who work there. But all the same, it kind of shattered my impression of him from the cordial, friendly kind of persona that I think he puts on when he's talking to guests coming through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, he's not trying to take your money. He's giving you money.
Well, a little bit.
So talk about what it was that made you first start thinking, hey, maybe all of this young earth creationism stuff isn't actually true, because to go, what, 20-ish years or so?
Yeah, 15 or 20, I would say.
Okay. Of being a young earth creationist and well into your adult life, that's that's got to be a big change for you, basically.
Yeah. So when I got started there, and I said about 6 months in, I worked at the Ark, and I met a Messianic Jewish person, and we became really good friends. I became friends with her husband and all our kids and everything, and through that relationship, I started to change my perspective on the Torah and whether Christians should or shouldn't be keeping the Mosaic Law. And I changed all of my actions and everything quite dramatically at the time. It was like I became convinced of it, and then I shifted everything. I gave up the bacon. I started wearing the silly little tzitzit strings. Started keeping the Sabbath, and anyway, so I did that for about 2.5 years while I was working for them, and they were like not hostile to me personally, but they were hostile to that viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of shook my interest in them, or my love for them as an organization a little bit.
Right.
And there were more things that started to come out that just seemed more and more hostile, and not a very good work environment. And then about a year later, through the Messianic Jewish thing, I came to the conclusion that Jesus was not God and was never presented as that in the Bible. And that is a fireable position. So I kept that to myself for about 1.5 years. While I was kind of studying through, I was on the fence about it. And eventually that was the reason that I quit, is because I didn't want to lie to them about agreeing to something that I really didn't agree with. Shortly after that, or maybe around that time, I started looking into the kind of getting more invested into the mythology and the background of the Old Testament. I had convinced myself, or I mean, not really convinced myself, but I decided that if the Bible is true, whatever the oldest things that it says about the world must be true. And that led me into studying more about the creation story, more about how, I mean, really the early Hebrews thought the world was flat. They believed there was some cosmic battle between El and Leviathan, or Yahweh and Leviathan. And he carves up her body and uses it to form the sea and the sky, something to that effect. And there's hints of that in the Bible, but there's also a lot of overlap with other mythologies and religions, to the point that it would be, I think it's disingenuous to ignore all of that evidence, even though the story in the Bible is not as complete as it is in some of the other religious accounts.
Okay.
And there were a few months where I really tried to hold both positions at the same time. I was trying to force myself to, I don't know, look at the tree blowing and think there was a spirit involved or something, because I imagine that's how the early Hebrews probably would have thought about the world. And I really tried to hold that position as long as I could. It fractured really early, as you might imagine. It just isn't how the world works. And I've known for longer than I've been a creationist, I've known that the world doesn't work like that. And I can tell you what causes wind, and that the world is a globe and everything. So my faith in that position in Scripture really crumbled. And
Okay.
I guess it had been ingrained in me for so long that if the Bible, like if the literal 6-day creation in Genesis isn't true, then I probably should. I can't allegorize it like a lot of groups did. There was a point in my life where I probably could have been satisfied with allegorizing Genesis and the creation narrative. But the more I looked into it, and the more literally I tried to take it, the further it pushed me from actually accepting it as truth.
Okay.
And that led me to Answers in Genesis on Facebook, and then that led me to you and Logic and Apologia and a few other YouTubers who have all I've been binging their content basically for the past month and a half or so.
Well, I appreciate the views.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, actually, Logic and I are currently at the beginning stages of working on a collaboration video.
Oh, cool.
So there's a pretty good chance that here up in the next, I don't know, a couple months, we don't have a firm time frame yet. But that, yeah, I may end up on his channel for a little guest spot. So
Awesome.
yeah, that could be fun. We already have a video picked out. It's I don't even remember which ministry it is that put it out, but it's a Young Earth Creationist video. It's a little cartoon, but so you would say that for you, it was primarily looking into the Old Testament and finding problems with interpreting that literally. So
Mhm.
did you at any point also look into things like, because, Answers in Genesis puts forth these things that they purport are evidence of the literal truth of, the Genesis narrative, or at least their version of, or not want to say their version, their interpretation of it.
Yeah.
Because, the translations they're reading are based off of the same text as everyone else. So they don't have a version of it. They just have an interpretation of it. So did you actually look into any of those things that they use as kind of apologetics to say, well, maybe, this thing about the ark or the geology or evolution is still true, and maybe I can maintain this level of belief in the literal truth of these events?
I did that after coming to the theological conclusion. I was homeschooled for half of my education until college, but it was fourth grade through ninth grade, and then I went 3 years of public high school. But even then, somehow I managed to avoid biology class, and I never like all of my science teachers, even at a public school, were some form of creationist. I think they were probably all old Earth, at least the only one I knew for sure. But they were never really aggressive about pushing that, like any scientific viewpoint. They taught the methodology and everything, but they never got too deep into it as far as whether like when it comes to historical science, that kind of thing.
Right.
So then when I went to college, I went to a Christian university for 2 years, one that was endorsed by AIG, and then I transferred to a state school. But by that point, I was so ingrained in it that I, even when I took classes that would have pushed me another way, I just kind of, I was a little bit mentally defensive, and I figured I'll do the work, I'll get the grade, but I'm not going to believe what they say because they're coming from an anti-biblical position.
Okay.
So I think the theological part of it and looking into the mythology and realizing it doesn't match what we see in the world, that was the first step for me in being able to examine what I assumed to be true about all of their proof texts and everything.
Right. So I have a question about the school teacher thing about. Now you were in Ohio at the time, right?
What part?
When you were in high school, I think you said it was high school, when you had the science teachers who were some kind of creationist?
That was actually in Illinois, and
Okay.
one of my physics teacher was the old Earth creationist, and we actually talked about different versions of the flood. And I think at that point I espoused the canopy theory, and I thought he was just silly for not believing it. Like, I didn't realize how prideful I was about it. I guess that's just youth. But anyway,
probably.
he went to our church, and it was not a close family friend, but I mean, we knew each other from church. We knew each other from school. He was not someone who was going to chase you down and like force you to acknowledge reality or anything.
Right.
And then my other teachers, I believe all of them were either Christian or Catholic, and we never really got into evolution. But in my English class, senior year, my huge research paper that I did was all about the flood. So, and I spent like hours on that.
In an English class?
Yeah, they had us do a research paper, and you had to document all your notes and everything. So that was the topic that I chose to research for my paper.
So
I probably still have the folder about it somewhere.
So about how prevalent would you say is creationism in Illinois? Because I mean, I have no idea.
It's really hard to say. I didn't originally grow up there. We moved there when I was 15, and I didn't get too involved outside of our own little community. I started attending a fundamentalist church with some friends from high school, and it was everywhere there. I mean, they had AIG literature everywhere. So
Right.
at least within our fundy church, it was the only position that anybody would have held, at least publicly.
Right. Okay. Well, Maya says that she's from Illinois, and she hadn't heard of YEC. So, the thing is that I grew up in Massachusetts, and it's pretty hard to find young Earth creationists in Massachusetts. But when you grow up in one of the few churches there that is a young Earth creationist church, then a lot of the people end up being young Earth creationists. So it's always one of those things where, like, when you grow up in a particular small group, you always get a sort of skewed view of how prevalent it is. Because growing up, if I had to guess, like, oh, how many people walking down the street do you think would agree with you about creation and evolution and stuff? I've been like, I don't know, maybe half, maybe it's probably would have been my guess, but it's, at least in Massachusetts, it's not half. It's significantly lower than half. So that's interesting. All right, so what about other creationist organizations like the Institute for Creation Research or what's that? The Discover Institute, or even the Kent Hovind's Creation Science Evangelism. Was there any literature from those places at church, or did anyone listen to those people?
I don't know if they had any of that there. I always liked Institute for Creation Research and read their materials until pretty recently. I was subscribed to Acts and Facts magazine, and used to read it like every day. I would check their website for new publications. This was like 10 years ago that I would do this, but then I didn't even hear about Kent Hovind until I think around the time I started working for AIG. I knew of Eric a little bit, but it was really just Answers in Genesis and ICR for me until I got to working there. And then when I heard Kent's name, it was like the first time I heard it was kind of in this like hush hush. We don't really talk about that context.
Well, AIG has long not been a fan of Kent Hovind because he's too stupid even for them, is basically what it comes down to. They posted at one point this, it might still be up, I don't know, but they posted this thing called Arguments We Think Creationists Shouldn't Use. Mm-hmm. And virtually all of them were just Kent Hovind talking points that were so bad that even AIG was just like, nope, you shouldn't say this because you'll look like an idiot. So it is always funny to hear some of the little bits of infighting. And he is one of the ones that other creationist organizations are particularly like, oh my goodness, why do people have to associate him with us because it's so bad?
Yeah. Do you know the name of Jonathan Sarfati?
I do know the name. I don't know if why can't I remember who he is?
I can't remember what his specialty is, and he used to work for AIG years ago, and then he's started his own group now. I can't think of what it is off the top of my head, but just to tell you a little bit about the infighting, he was friends with a friend of mine on Facebook, and he posted some blog or article about Easter, I think, and I read through the thing. There were a lot of factual errors in it, so I called him out on it, and I had no idea who he was at the time. And my friend messaged me and said, hey, you better stop. If he knows you work for AIG, this is going to get bad. So I block him. Like, I don't know what the situation was there or what his experience was when he left, but there was apparently a lot of bad blood there.
Interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It seems like AIG behind the scenes is not the organization that they would like people to think it is on the face of it.
Nope.
So, all right. And that's one of the reasons that I was really interested to have you on, because, I don't work for AIG. I don't know anyone who's worked for AIG. So, yeah, it's interesting to hear, because I've heard stories that people have said that it's a hostile work environment, shall we say.
Yeah, and I don't think that's every department, but there are certain things. I mean, it seems like if you are related to somebody there, you're probably going to have a better time. and can get away with more things or are going to get promoted faster. I mean, they run it like a small family business, but it's not anymore. And
Right.
you can kind of excuse some of what goes on if you just keep in mind that they started as a small family business and have never really outgrown that. Because there was a lot of nepotism and people getting either hired into positions because they knew somebody or related to somebody, and a lot of times they were not even as qualified as the people who passed on. And also, if you're looking to like raise a family there, it's almost impossible to do without two incomes, which is interesting because so many of the people there like to homeschool. I don't really know how they do it because the wages are not competitive in the marketplace. And I mean, there are other things I could get into. I don't know if I want to just totally rag on them the entire time, but there was a lot of stuff that I could point to as not being a good, healthy place to work.
I mean, my audience will mind if you rag on them the whole time. There's no love lost here for Answers in Genesis. In fact, my last two video series, so the last one that I just did was Creationism and the Big Bang, which was based on responding to things that were done in the an Answers in Genesis speech. You know, in that little theater that they have at the Creation Museum. I don't remember what it's called, but it was one of those talks they gave there. And then I started another one because my patrons voted for more Answers in Genesis. And so this one is by Karina Altman, who is their animal keeper. Do you know her?
I didn't get to know her very well, and I never really cared to. I don't know much about her as a person. I don't think that she's probably that. I mean, she seems like she's probably a really nice person, but I think, and this is all hearsay, so that's part of why I don't really want to get into too much, because I intentionally didn't document very much when I left because I didn't want to have a chip on my shoulder.
Right.
But I think from the grapevine that she was involved in one of the nepotism issues of somebody getting terminated under suspicious allegations and a position opening up.
Oh, okay. Oh, and I want to acknowledge that we have a 199 euros super sticker from Jens van Broekhoven with a nice thumbs up. Thank you very much for your generosity, Jens. Very much appreciated. So yeah, don't want to let that go by without acknowledging it. Yeah, well, in the video, because I've watched it all once through real quick just to see if it was something worth bothering with, and I don't really remember a lot of it. But what it seemed to me was that she really liked animals. Like that was a big passion of hers, which makes sense since she's basically their zookeeper. You want your zookeeper to be into, animals, and but she does not seem very well versed in, I guess, logic or reasoning or science, which one of the things I've noticed about AIG is that they trot out people to speak outside of their field, even when they have people in the particular field. So, for instance, the guy that they had talking about cosmology and stellar formation and stuff like that, he was a geologist. But
I don't remember that, but yeah.
But they have Nathaniel Jeanson. Why isn't he the one doing it? Probably because he would be too embarrassed to say these things because he knows enough to know that this is laughably bad. And then they have then they would trot out in one speech I saw, they trotted out Georgia Purdom to talk about rocks and fossils. It's like, well, you have a geologist. Why isn't he giving this speech?
Yeah.
And then, they'll have like Bodhi Hodge come out and give a speech about genetics. And it's like, you have a geneticist on staff. Why isn't she doing this? And so I've noticed that strange thing where it's like everyone always speaks off of their own topic. And I don't know, but I suspect that it's because the people whose topic that is would have trouble getting through it with a straight face. But I don't know.
It probably is true. I was never that cynical, I should say, when I worked there.
Right.
And since I never really knew there was enough reason or justification to challenge creationism at the time, like I didn't really even know how bad some of their arguments were until after leaving. Now I can totally see that, but I wouldn't have thought that at the time that they were doing that kind of thing. I never watched enough of the talks myself to get
Right.
an idea about it, because when you're at the museum, you're working, you're helping with guests. You might introduce a show, or back before they started doing recorded introductions, you might introduce a show or a speaker, but then after that, you're not really paying attention to what they're saying or who it is. I will say they have a, not for Answers News, but for a lot of their like weekday talks, they have a series of topics, like different scripts that they'll go through, and every speaker might have a little bit of a different way of going through it, but all of them will cover one or two talks, and then they might have a few individual ones for more of their specialty.
Okay. Oh, and there is one thing. So now I'm extremely confident that Ken Ham isn't a werewolf, but I'm not 100% confident. Can you shed any light on this?
If this is some conspiracy or something that's been going on behind the scenes, I'm not aware of it. Wouldn't surprise me at all, though. He sort of has that appearance about him, and I say this as a bearded man. He just, something about the way he shaves or whatever makes him look like that. So I don't know if there's more to it than that. I could definitely see it.
Okay, so we're still sticking with, for now, probably not a werewolf.
Well, let me just tell you this. I've never hung out with him on a full moon.
Oh, all right. Well,
So
we're going to have to find someone who, if we can't find, how many people who haven't hung out with him on a full moon does it take before we can say he might be a werewolf? I don't know. We'll have to crunch some numbers and see about that. So, yeah, I've actually made that joke on a few things where he's appeared on my I put up a little blurb at the bottom as a subtitle, like, Ken Ham, probably not a werewolf. Because when he grows out his beard a little bit, yeah, he kind of looks like someone that you would cast as a werewolf in a werewolf movie.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I ever made that thought connection before, but I have noticed that a few people who work there really seem to reinforce the idea that we share a biological ancestry with apes. Like, just in their appearance, like you're talking to them and it's like, you really look like somebody I've seen in a nature documentary before.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is that when you really dive into what is it that makes an ape, you start to realize just how obvious it is that humans are apes. They're unusual, very derived apes. But then once you dig into it, you're like, oh, like this is all just slightly rescaled ape anatomy, all of it, every single thing.
Well, in Disney's Tarzan, do you remember the scene where he's like looking at his reflection in the water and he's all upset because he's not a gorilla, and then his mom walks up to him and says, "Let me see your hand," and they put their hands together.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been able to get that scene out of my head, and I mean, while I never seriously questioned young Earth creationism until this past year, I can't tell you the number of times I've looked down at my hands and thought, man, these look so much like an ape. And and I mean, that's been kind of just in the back of my mind. And also, like one of the things I studied through biblically is like I had given up the idea of dualism, like we're a separate body and soul, united in flesh, and then you have this immortal soul that lives on. I don't think the Bible teaches anything like that. And so like a year or two ago, I came to the conclusion that the Bible itself actually teaches that we are just animals. And when we die, and then there might be some kind of a resurrection in the future. And I think it especially gets into that in the New Testament, but it doesn't distinguish between humans and animals in any real way other than we're somehow made in God's image.
Yeah. It definitely does seem to me, and of course, I try not to get too heavily into theology, but it does seem like there is a much more connected sense of how, especially the Old Testament, treats animals and humans, and as opposed to what's now currently often being taught, where humans are just so radically different from other animals. And one of the things that kind of confuses me is like, you'll get even creationists will say things like, "Oh yeah, humans are mammals." It's like, okay, well, are they vertebrates? Oh yeah, they're vertebrates. It's like, okay, well, are they animals? Oh, maybe in the the taxonomy sense. But then you get down and it's like, okay, well, if it's okay to say humans are mammals, it's okay to say they're vertebrates and animals from a taxonomic standpoint, then why aren't they apes? What's
Yeah.
why do you cut it off there? And I've never heard a good answer.
I don't think there is a logical reason. I think it is we are the only species that seems to be aware to the extent that we can think abstractly about our own existence, about other creatures' existence. We can think about the future and plan for it in ways that other animals can't. And so I think when we're the only ones with this higher level of cognitive ability to the degree that we have it, I think that breeds a sense of we're something other than the rest of them.
Yeah, I think that probably is true.
And I've often tried to put myself in the mind of my parents' dog or something and tried to think, what is he thinking? Like, does he realize that he's a head and a body and everything? Or does he just run around and all he sees is what's in front of him and he's not even like oh, it's hard to just say really, but
like, do dogs have object permanence as a concept?
Yeah, I guess. Are they aware of themselves as a physical being, or are they just aware of their own mind and whatever's in their head, and then they move around and I mean they have sensory input, but like I've wondered if they are as aware of their own form as humans are. And you can think of that question with any kind of animal. Like it's not just dogs, but
well, have you heard about the mirror test?
Yeah, I have.
So one form of it, so it's not always easy to tell if an animal recognizes itself in the mirror because animals don't always have the same reaction to other animals. But one of the tests that's done is you put a mark on an animal that wouldn't normally be there. So you put a little dot of paint or something like that, non-toxic, hopefully, in case it tries to eat any of it. But if the animal notices the mark in the mirror and then tries to manipulate it on their own body, so like if you do this with a chimpanzee, like if you paint a little dot on its forehead or something, when the chimpanzee looks in the mirror, it'll notice that and then it will start to rub its forehead because it's noticing that there's something on there. So it recognizes the reflection as being an image of itself, which corresponds to its own body. Most animals do not pass this test. Dogs don't. I don't believe pigs do, but chimpanzees do. Gorillas usually do. I believe macaques do. And so there is the sense that there are some animals that do have a sense of self and others that I guess we can't say they don't, but it's less clear that they do. But there are also other things like there have been some tests designed to test the idea of a theory of mind. You know what that is?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, in case anyone in the audience might not, because it's not a term that gets tossed around a lot. All the theory of mind is the idea that there are other things out there with a mind that's like yours, and that they have their own internal reality and their own perceptions, which are different from yours, but are similar in the sense that they experience the world in a way that's analogous to how you do. And so there have been tests to see if other apes can understand that, either other chimpanzees or gorillas or humans or whatever either have or lack information that they themselves have. And it seems that, yes, at least some of the great apes that have been tested other than humans have shown some evidence of a theory of mind. They've been able to do things like recognize that someone new entering a room doesn't know where a concealed object would be. And so that either they would have to point out where it would be for them to get it for them, or that, they shouldn't expect the person who's now come into the room to be able to find this concealed object. And real quick, I want to acknowledge that we have a $4.99 super chat from Vandalia1998, who, by the way, in case anyone is wondering, I'm going to be on Vandalia1998's channel in a few hours. It'll be, I believe, 2 p.m. my time, which will make it 4 p.m. Eastern. And Vandalia1998, if I'm getting that wrong, please correct me, because my my timekeeping today has been a little bit scattershot. If the common design thing were true, I guess that means God was like, "Hey, those chimp things I made look cool. Let's make humans look like them." Yeah, basically.
Yeah, which by the way, I saw the interview you guys did together was one of the first ones I watched. Great interview.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, I just I saw the name and it looked familiar. So yeah, cool.
Okay. Yeah. So everyone, check out Vandali 1998's channel because he has had some really good interviews. He recently did one with Erica or Gutsick Gibbon, who's been on my channel a few times. 5 p.m. Eastern, so that would make it 3 my time. Okay, that's right. Goodness, I'm. Yeah, today and time has not been a great thing for me. Plus, what is it? Tonight, right? You guys are switching the clocks over.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not.
Oh,
So now, as of tomorrow, all the time changes or all the times for everyone's going to be different. I'm going to be this. It's going to be the same time here as it is in California, but I'm going to be 3 hours behind everyone on the East Coast and 2 hours behind everyone in Central, and I'll be an hour behind everyone else in Mountain because Arizona doesn't do daylight savings time because they're too smart for that.
I wish the rest of the world would catch up, or at least the rest of the country. But I'm glad you mentioned that because I work for a bank, and that's we get callers from all over the country. That's good to know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and man, people always showing up for things or late or early on those time change days. It really is something that just needs to go away, but whatever. Which actually reminds me, because Arizona doesn't change the times that they're doing things, and the times that I do some of my premieres are based on availability of people who live near me, including Benthoven. Do expect times for things like streams and things to have to change to help accommodate the fact that I don't change my clocks. So, for instance, if you've been used to Kent with Bent being on at, say, 8 p.m. Eastern, it's going to shift to, I think it's, 9 p.m. Eastern? So there's that for the audience. Get ready for that. That's going to be a little bit of a change. So like this Tuesday, it'll be 9 p.m. Eastern, not 8 p.m. Eastern because of the time change. So there you go. And then the Evil Scotsman says, "How I get modern clocks, they tend to auto-update." It's true, but I don't even have to worry about it because the time doesn't change. So what was it? Oh, when you were... So after you got out of Young Earth Creationism, which was primarily through looking at the Bible and realizing that the sort of ancient Hebrew conception of the world did not really well correspond to how, modern science has come to understand the world. And then, so what would you say was... So I guess the thing is there that their understanding has been kind of filtered into AIG's understanding. So AIG loosely, at least, bases this off of this sort of ancient cosmology. That's where they get the whole Genesis narrative thing, right?
Yeah.
So what was it about the ancient Hebrew understanding? Was it the flat Earth thing? Was it the idea of the spirits that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense?
It was everything together. The biggest thing was the Leviathan issue. I was aware of it in, I think, Psalm 74 might be the one where it brings it up. And I'd read a little bit about Leviathan from other views. I guess I should say there are two things. About a year ago, I started listening to the Yale University lecture series on the Old Testament. And I think I only got about halfway through, but the first couple of episodes or classes where the professor was going through, she talked about a lot of overlap between the Hebrew Bible, especially with the creation story, and then Adam and Eve was the one that really stood out to me. And then also with Ugaritic and Babylonian myths about very similar Adam and Eve-like people. And that was exciting to me at first because I thought I could kind of harmonize all these different viewpoints into a single one, and have this like brand new systematic theology that I was interested in. Then I got in. I started looking more into Leviathan stuff, and I couldn't continue like holding that viewpoint. AIG has like, I don't think they have anyone on staff who knows biblical Hebrew, at least not beyond like a seminary pastor level that you might get. They don't have anybody on staff who can point out and say, well, in the Genesis account itself, it mentions Yam and Tiamat and a few of the other gods from these other cultures. So it definitely seems like there's a lot of polytheistic influence in the creation account itself that they just aren't aware of, or maybe they do know about it and ignore it. But then the whole flat Earth narrative really got like wore on me for a while. In the kind of quasi-messianic Jewish group that I've been part of, that it's called the Hebrew Roots Movement, they are very prone towards pseudoscience nonsense like flat Earth, and disbelieving in gravity, disbelieving in other planets. I recently got into a row with a friend of mine who thought that the panoramic photograph of the Martian surface was a hoax because there's no way we could have a robot on Mars taking pictures. And
what would prevent that?
Oh, he's everything. He doesn't think it's possible to put a robot on another planet. He thinks it would take like half a year to communicate with that robot because he doesn't understand how light speed works and how radio waves work. He doesn't. I mean, just he had so many criticisms, and he's like, well, if this technology exists, you would see people rioting in the streets demanding that we have it, not realizing that all that technology is in your smartphone. It's just
right. What technology? Wheels, solar panels, and radios? I mean,
exactly.
I'm pretty sure we got that covered, guys.
Exactly, but he was just so incredulous, and you get that kind of stuff all over the place. So as I was getting more invested in that religious perspective, I was encountering it more and more, and I felt like I was at a crossroads. If I'm going to stick to this like completely and not abandon it, where am I going with that? If I'm going to hold to this theological position and really invest in the Hebraic understanding of the Old Testament, I need to know and believe what the Hebrews knew and believed. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized it just does not comport with reality. And I mean, I could see how nomadic shepherds living in the Middle East 4,000 years ago would come to those conclusions because they had no awareness or anything about the world outside of where they lived. But it just doesn't work in a world with airplanes and GPS and cell phones and cars and everything. You can't hold that position without abandoning all modern scientific advancement.
Right. Oh, and one thing that you said reminded me of something. You said that you didn't think there was anyone who was particularly good at Hebrew over at AIG.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a tendency to, when I'm doing something for, like I'm listening to something either just because I want to see what they're saying about it or because I might be doing a video or something like that, I have a tendency to just listen. But someone pointed something out to me, which is that if they like to show, I don't know how authentic they are, but they like to show little scrolls written in Hebrew that are supposed to look like Torah scrolls, basically. I don't actually know if they've gone out and actually managed to get themselves a Torah scroll to film or something.
But they probably have, and I can explain why in a moment. But
one of the things that was pointed out to me, and I started noticing, is that if they show a scroll written in Hebrew, there's like a 90% chance it's going to be upside down.
Yes, I've noticed that too.
And I'd never thought about it because I don't like. Mm-hmm. I'm almost never actually even putting my eyes on the screen where this stuff is coming up. But then I was like, all right, I'm going to pay attention. And sure enough, I was like, it's upside down. Yeah. Like that's the most basic thing that you could know about Hebrew is which way should you hold the scroll to know how to read it.
Well, and I mean, Hebrew is a little bit unintuitive for someone who only knows English because it goes from right to left. And instead of like in English, the baseline for letters is at the bottom. The baseline for letters in Hebrew, if you have a lined paper, would be the middle of the row or kind of the top of the letters. And everything comes down from there. So I can see where they would think, like, look at that baseline. And if there's anybody who knows Hebrew and wants to correct me on that, please do. But it just the way that you write it is more focused with the upper right corner, seems, rather than where it sits in the bottom of the line. I don't know. Maybe that's incorrect or something.
I mean, so
yeah, just to say they don't understand that.
no. I think what they do is they look and say, okay, well, I think what they do is they look for the line that's justified, because you can left justify or right justify a text. And unsurprisingly, Hebrew tends to be right justified because it's written right to left. So when you get to what needs to be the end of a line and you need to go down a line, those on the left side, those aren't all going to be the same length. But if you don't know the first thing about Hebrew and you want to just show a text, for you, it looks better as a person who knows English as their primary language if it's right justified. So what do? You flip it upside down because you don't know which way to hold that damn scroll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at too. They do have a couple of Torah scrolls in there, or Bible scrolls in their collection. I don't remember what books, but I think somebody had donated one to the Creation Museum, or at least I'm pretty sure it's on display there still. And then at the Ark Encounter, they have a pretty cool exhibit by the Bible, or the Museum of the Bible, where they donated an exhibit to the Ark, and you walk through different rooms, and they're situated like every continent. And there's an example of a missionary in each of those continents. And then the last one is a bunch of mirrors with maps on the wall, and it says, well, now it's your turn. Go out and figure out where you should go. But they do have a couple of Hebrew scrolls in there, and as far as I can tell, they're all arranged properly.
Well, that's good, because man, when I saw that, it was amazing. And it's actually one of the things that I've noticed is that there it's actually a few things that I've pointed out. Like you ever heard the term? I'm sure you have the word baramin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it basically, someone took the lexical form of the verb barat and the lexical form of the noun mean and just shoved them together. But the thing is that no one involved in young Earth creationism apparently is good enough at anything, including Semitic linguistics, to know that the lexical form of the verb isn't either the infinitive or the past participle, which is what they wanted, because they wanted to mean created kind. So it should be the past participle, which would also mean that it should come after mean, because the past participle is, of course, going to be treated as an adjective. Mm-hmm. So not only did they get the word order wrong, but they didn't realize that the lexical form of the verb is the third person singular simple past. Like, this is one of the first things you learn when you're studying any Semitic language. If you want to look up a verb, the form that you're going to find is the simplest form, and that's the third person singular simple past. And at least in Arabic, it's going to be a masculine subject, because Arabic likes to be difficult and have gender distinctions for second and third person in the verb, because screw you, Arabic likes to suck that way. I spent a few years studying Arabic, so that got annoying. But yeah, and so
yeah.
And the thing is that we're taking it from biblical Hebrew, which is by standard a verb, subject, object. Mm-hmm. And so since Baramin has no indication that mean is anything other than the subject, which you would need in order to disambiguate if you wanted it to be anything other than the subject, Baramin literally means a kind created. Mm. It doesn't mean created kind. And it's bugged me for a long time that they're that bad at Hebrew.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they just stick ology on the end of it, because why bother trying to keep your languages different? Let's just toss on a Greek ending to this bastardized Hebrew word that doesn't mean anything close to what they think it means.
Yeah, I think they're just looking for something that sounded Hebrew and sounded like it could be a scientific word.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, don't get me wrong. couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the passive participle for barat is. Like,
Yeah.
but I know that if I wanted to have it, I would have to go look that up if I wanted to use that in a word. Like, that's something I would go do. I wouldn't just pick up my Hebrew lexicon off my shelf, which I don't even know what shelf it's on anymore, and just look up the word create.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not really surprised that there's that level of misunderstanding of Hebrew, and which puzzles me, because it's like that's your favorite, that's the language your favorite book is written in.
Right. Well, and then going on the upside down text thing, I'm pretty sure I have even seen it was either Hebrew in a video that was talking about the New Testament, or Greek in a video talking about the Old Testament. So
Nice.
another thing, like there's a huge lack of understanding there. Oh man, I lost my train of thought just now. I had another example, but I can't remember what it was.
Every time they get something like that wrong, it kind of shocks me, and I don't know why it still does, but I should just come to realize that, like, even the basic level of just like knowing about the Bible itself, like, they don't care about the science. Why should they suddenly actually care about the Bible either?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just hit my desk there. Yeah, it's crazy, and it's something that actually, strangely enough, comes up with Ken Hovind a lot. He likes to make these absurd linguistic claims that don't make any sense, and for some reason, he always picks languages that I know enough of to go check on. Like, he likes to say, well, in the Hebrew, and I'm like, all right, let's go check the Hebrew. Like, one of the things he likes to say is, if your Bible says that God created the heavens and the earth, that's wrong. It's heaven. I'm like, well, let's go check Genesis 1:1.
Yeah.
And like, I pull up, an online copy of the Masoretic text, and it's like, oh, hey, look, the word translated as heavens in most translations of the Bible is plural. I can tell, because it's not, Hebrew is really easy for telling if a verb is plural or not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's unlike something like Arabic. Most verbs in Hebrew end in one of two plural endings, depending on the gender of the noun. In Arabic, there are actually there are cognate plural endings, but they are almost only ever applied to nouns referring to people. For anything that isn't a person, there's usually an internal, the triconsonantal root system for Semitic languages. Hebrew uses that system almost exclusively to rearrange words into what's called a broken plural.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't matter, but yeah, you just have to break it up.
Well, I think your understanding of Semitic languages passes mine. But one really funny thing about the word for heavens, shamayim, is that it literally means sky water.
I don't know that I knew that. I think that's a new one.
Yeah, mayim, I believe, is waters, and I don't know what shah means, but I recently had looked it up for something I was working on, and that's essentially what it means. Like, you have the water below and the water's above. I
don't know to what degree it's related, but I will say that shams is Arabic for sun. So there might be a connection there, but then again, just because it sounds similar, it doesn't mean it's going to actually be a cognate, because I don't know enough Hebrew to actually put that together. But it is something, which actually, what was it?
Well, I'm trying to look it up right now.
I once heard the argument that it was a scientific miracle that the Bible in Hebrew used the feminine gender for ants, because most ants are female, because they only produce male ants during the breeding season, and then whatever. But I was looking it up, and I'm just like, the word for ant is just feminine in Hebrew and in Arabic. I'm not going to go check all the other Semitic languages out there, because but like, why are we saying that this is a miracle?
Right. It'd be like looking at French and seeing that a table is feminine, I think, and trying to derive some connection from that. Right.
It's just like, it had to be one of them, and a whole host of these languages use it in the feminine, and they would continue to call an ant by this feminine noun, even if it happened to be a male ant. So, like, I think you have to both I think to actually buy that argument, you have to not know enough about linguistics in general, also not have any particularly good knowledge of Hebrew, and then also have a strong bias towards English, which tends to use natural gender as opposed to other languages, which, I mean, almost no other languages use natural gender. So yeah, it was a very strange argument that I heard. And Kent Hovind has also done some stuff with Old English for some reason. Like, he's made this argument that, if you read Beowulf in the original Old English, he's described as like a dragon, like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So, of course, having gotten an A in Old English and having read Beowulf in Old English before, because that's a thing that I can and have done, I just pulled up the section where it describes Beowulf, and it doesn't actually give a physical description, but it does call him Cain's son. And it's the Cain from the Bible, because it says, after it says he's Cain's son, it says the Cain who slew his brother Abel, that one. It's like,
wow.
So yeah, he's descended from Cain. He's not a dinosaur, unless Ken Hovind wants to say that Cain from the Bible was a dinosaur and Eve gave birth to a dinosaur.
Well, and then how does he survive the flood?
Oh, well, so it seems to be implied that he's not a direct son, that he's some kind of ancestor or something. And then there was sort of a myth that the mark of Cain essentially granted him some kind of immortality or something. But the other thing you have to remember is that the copy of Beowulf that we have is almost certainly a sort of a Christianized recension of an older story that didn't have these explicitly Christian elements in it. And so originally he was probably some kind of troll or giant. And then when the monks who copied it down were kind of adding in these Christian elements, they were like, well, what's Grendel going to be? He's one of Cain's descendants.
Yeah.
But,
it's funny you bring that up, because there's a lot of, like, I was really interested in the Nephilim for a while and tried to incorporate that into my understanding. And I was especially compelled by all the times in the New Testament where it seems like Jesus and the authors in the New Testament referred back to Enochian myths and legends about these giants made from human-angel hybrids. And I was reading through the Robert Altered translation of the Old Testament and came to a footnote he had about Og, king of Bashan, the giant who was like 13 feet tall, and AIG occasionally will bring him up as they have their like giant exhibit in the Ark. And the Hebrew mythology says that he was a Nephilim that survived the flood. And that doesn't make any sense in what AIG believes about it. So not only are they ignorant of the language and the cultural views of the Hebrews, they also are ignorant of Jewish claims about all this stuff, and they have no idea what their spiritual forebears believed about anything in the Old Testament. Like they read it from their perspective of the past, like 50 years or however long Young Earth Creationism has been around, and are completely unaware of how people interpreted it even a century ago or 15 centuries ago or something like that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I have found about a lot of, especially the kinds of Christians who tend to be young earth creationists, is that their idea of history is basically like, well, there was Genesis, the flood, Exodus, King David, maybe King Solomon, some kind of exile. Would it happen once or twice? I don't know, whatever. Then Jesus. Then, well, my pastor founded this church in 10 years ago. Like that's your whole view of history. Like, yeah. You don't, not only do they ignore all of the tradition of Jewish interpretation and scholarship of their own scriptures, they also ignore the entirety of the Christian history of interpretation of both the scriptures they share in common with Jewish people, as well as the scriptures that are unique to Christianity.
Yeah.
Just a complete lack of any historical understanding of how these things were traditionally interpreted. And they just think that, say 500 years ago, before all this evolution came about, people just thought like we did as modern 21st century evangelical Christians. Like, no one thought like you. It's an extremely novel form of Christianity. But I do want to say it has been it's been a little bit over an hour. And so I'm going to now say that if you have questions for Seth, or I guess also for me, put them in the chat. I will be going through them in the order that I see them, unless there is a super chat, in which case you get to jump ahead if there is some kind of queue. So there you go. That is that. But while waiting to see if any questions do in fact come in, we can continue on. But yeah, I do kind of wonder how it is that you're going to be someone who's going to base so much of your life as a professional, like these professional creationists do, on a particular book that you can't actually even really read. Because, okay, you can read a translation of Genesis, and that's fine. But if you're going to base your entire professional and allegedly scholarly career on this, you'd think you'd learn the language.
Yeah, I think they have such. I mean, I'll say from personal experience, when I finally gave up on the idea of creationism, there was this huge weight taken off my chest of I hadn't realized how skeptical I was and how defensive I was of anything coming out of the scientific community. And like now looking back on it, I realized that as I was growing up, I would hear something in science and it'd be like, oh, I wonder what AIG says about that. Like I was waiting for their news segment to come out on Friday, and then they eventually switched to Answers News Live, and I was just waiting to hear their feedback because I knew it didn't agree with what I believed. And now realizing that I can look at a scientific publication or even just like a layman's version of it and not immediately jump into defensive mode. And I think you have to have that kind of a persecuted mindset of everyone is against us, it's us versus them. And then once you have that, you're able to you're able to not look at your own view so seriously, like you were saying, and you don't open yourself up to criticism because you're so busy criticizing everything else, I guess.
Right. Well, and we have our first question from Trim Tarask, who is apparently like conducting a survey on this.
Mm-hmm.
Is pineapple on pizza evil?
I have never tried it. I would lean toward yes.
Okay, so a hesitant yes. As I've said before, I do not recommend it, but I'm not willing to say that it is in fact evil.
Right.
We also have sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We have an interesting comment from TD Lane. I have seen a lot of young Earth creationists say that the Bible is the oldest work of literature, despite Sumerian writings being millennia older. Yeah. The way they get around that is saying that Adam wrote Genesis, which is, and as he says, which is dumb, as Moses is the one who wrote the first several books of the Bible traditionally. We know that Genesis was written by several authors. Yeah. I've heard Kent Hovind especially espouse this view that the first parts of Genesis were written down by Adam, and then later by Abraham and Noah and whatnot.
It's the Toledot hypothesis, and AIG espouses that as well. They say that because different sections of Genesis are broken up into this is the account of so and so, that it must be a compilation of different older manuscripts, and then they go from there to the unsubstantiated leap of logic that maybe they were actually written by the people who were involved in the stories.
Right.
I think the Toledot view does kind of make sense, and I'm not too familiar with the document hypothesis to know if there's any validity to that or how it stacks up. But it doesn't follow that if you have these older documents that were strung together, that must mean that they were written by the people that they were about.
Right. Yeah, and actually I noticed, I haven't actually been to the Ark Encounter, but I've seen enough video of the various pictures of the various displays that I almost feel like I don't have to. But they have a scriptorium there, don't they?
That's what I was talking about, the Museum of the Bible. I wanted to invite you.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to mention this earlier. If you're ever in the area, you have a free couch bed and possibly free tickets, or at least half off.
Nice.
So, yeah, keep in touch.
I don't know when or if I'll be in the area, but I have said before that I would like to go to either well, possibly both, but I would like to get to one or both of the Ark Museum or the or the Ark Encounter, I guess it's called, yeah, or the Creation Museum. But I kind of feel like it would be like a safari. Like I'm going to go look at the creationists in the wild. I'm going to see what they do. Um, Although I would try not to be as rude as to act like that's what I was doing. And we have, this isn't a question, but I do want to read it from S Bendit. Yeah, S Bendit. Yeah, okay, I got that right. AIG might actually have people knowing this stuff. Like they have people like Georgia Purdom. They just let Ken Ham talk anyway. And well, that's actually something like that I was getting into before. Is that it seems like a lot of the times the people they have talk about the topics at hand aren't the people who you would think they would have. So, Georgia Purdom has a PhD in genetics, but I don't think I've ever heard her actually say anything about genetics other than covering the most basic parts of it.
Yeah.
So I honestly think they shuffle people away from their areas of expertise in an effort to make sure that basically they don't ever have to say things that they know are wrong and try to act like they don't know that it's wrong. And so one of the things that we've discussed on my channel before, especially in these Living Young Earth Creationists, is that while I don't think that the Sunday school teacher that you might have had at church or whatever are lying, I do think Ken Ham and Georgia Purdom and like Nathaniel Jeanson and Kent Hovind and all these people, they know they're lying to people.
Oh yeah, the way that they went about the attendance issue at the Ark Encounter is proof enough to me. I never had a suspicion that they were lying about the science and stuff that they believed, although now I can see it. But there were a few times in my position I would occasionally enter in updated attendance figures for every month. And I don't have those records. I wish I would have kept them, but that probably would be illegal or something to that effect. So, but they definitely
something in an employment contract somewhere saying you wouldn't.
Well, they definitely did not have the million attendance that they talked about in the first year.
Oh no,
they've been close, but they've never gotten up there. And in what I've seen from atheist and secularist estimations of their attendance, have been closer to the actual numbers than AIG was with when they were actually talking about it. Now they don't really talk about it because they know that people can figure it out.
Right. And so in case anyone doesn't know, one of the problems with trying to track attendance at the Ark Encounter is that the Ark Encounter doesn't release to the public attendance figures. It's also not clear, and maybe you can clear this up. Like, I know that there's a certain age under which you can get in free.
Mm-hmm. It's anywhere 5 or under 5.
Okay, and are those people? Is that number tracked? How many kids under 5 come in?
Yes.
Okay, so they do track that.
Yeah, they track it mainly probably for fire codes.
Okay.
I would imagine, because when you go up to the ticket window, you if you don't already have tickets, then you'll get them printed out, and they'll ask how many people you have under 5, and they'll print out tickets for everyone, and they'll scan them when you're getting on the bus. So they still track that information and keep all those numbers.
Okay.
As best as they can. There were a few times working up at the Creation Museum where we'd be scanning tickets to find out an hour later that none of them actually entered in the system. So sometimes it was just an estimate, but I'd say they have pretty good track of it.
Okay. Well, so but they don't release those, and so a number of groups who are to some degree or another opposed to the Ark Encounter, as for a number of reasons. One of which being the ridiculous pseudoscience, have been trying to keep track. And it's been difficult, but recently the city, I don't know how recently, a few years ago, I think, the city that the Ark Encounter is in started requiring that there be a $5, essentially a safety requirement, because the Ark is essentially not paying any taxes, but they're being covered by the city's fire department and police department and emergency response. And so they requested, or they demanded actually, that the ARC give them $5 per ticket sold to help cover these. Oh, is it 50 cents? I don't know.
Yeah,
I got the 5 right.
50 cents, like 2 quarters.
Okay, but that amount is in fact publicly available via freedom of information laws and things like that. And so people have been taking that and then dividing that number by, I guess it's the 50 cents to get a rough estimate. But there are problems because, like Seth said, there are kids who get in free, and there are also some people who have things like a lifetime pass. That's a thing you can buy. And so those people aren't getting in and paying that 5 cents because they're not selling a ticket. But
right. They're still getting scanned, so they track all the attendance.
Right. So we don't have all of the numbers for attendance, but we can get a rough estimate. And I'm not surprised that the people reporting on the numbers that they're getting from the estimates are more accurate than what AIG is saying themselves.
Yeah. I would say the inaccuracy that people tracking it went below is about half as bad as the over-reporting that AIG were doing when back at a year or two ago when they were actually saying, "Oh, we reached this goal" or whatever.
Okay. So we have a question from Trim Tarask. Did AIG want you to learn their books while you worked there?
They never enforced it, but they gave out like older copies of books that were either they might have ordered a surplus or there was a new edition coming out. So that they gave out a lot of their materials, and they also had them for prizes and different group functions. So they had the material available to you, and you got a pretty substantial discount as an employee.
Okay.
But they never forced it. Actually, one thing that really bothered me about them while working there is that they forbid their employees from discussing any of the materials with guests or even in each other in the presence of a guest, because they want everything to be directed through their bookstore, through their website. You're not allowed to talk about any theology, even if it has nothing to do with creationism, because they don't want people to get in fights with guests over different issues. Or I don't know. I understand why they want to control the narrative, but it also really infuriated me.
So this was for employees talking to guests?
Yeah, or even just each other
each other too. Oh, in front of you. Okay.
Yeah,
so like if you were in the break room or something, you could talk about something
right.
like that.
Yeah, you could, but you couldn't talk about the Bible in front of guests, even in an exhibit about the Bible.
Interesting. That's I guess I understand the policy, but yeah, you're right. It seems weird. From Vandalia 1998, what is the weirdest evolution cousins you have learned about? For me, it was that tuna are closer to humans than sharks, and mushrooms are closer to animals than plants.
I gotta say those two probably.
Uh-huh.
I haven't doing a whole lot yet, just because this is such a new switch for me. Just getting to the point of acknowledging that birds are derived dinosaurs really blew my mind, and I guess I'm still fixated on that. Every time I see a bird hopping around outside my window, I try to imagine it's a T-Rex. Where I work now, there is a pond nearby, and there are all these geese walking around everywhere. And I have to imagine that they must feel like velociraptors still, and that's why they're so aggressive.
Oh, man, geese are the worst.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. Last time, I don't want to retell it because I told it on the last one, but I told a story about basically chasing geese out of the street with a broom. And not using the bristle side first. Like I was not happy with these geese. But yeah, if anyone wants to, who hasn't heard that story, wants to hear it, go check out the last of these that I did. I believe that's the one it was on. But did you see my debate about that topic?
Yeah, I did. It was a little while ago that I watched it. I don't remember a lot of specifics, but yeah, it was a great debate. I need to go back and watch it again because what I usually do is listen to them while I'm driving in the car, and I'll ramp up the speed a little bit to get in as much as I can. So I need to go back and watch it full speed and actually like see what's on the screen this time.
Yeah, I recommend my audio remaster because in the original copy that I have, my audio is not very good because for some reason my mic was turned down in my my recording software. And so what I did was I actually grabbed Kent's copy of the debate because for some reason I came in much better on his version of the debate than the one that I captured. And so then I took my audio out of his version and I pasted over my audio in my version and got rid of my old audio. So it's the exact same debate. The only real difference is I cut out the technical difficulties that Kent had where his router reset. So in the original debate, there's like a 5-minute section where I don't know what's going on. I'm just talking to empty air because I don't know what's going on, people. Kent's gone. So I cut that out because who cares? Instead, I replaced it with like a 3-second black screen that says technical difficulties. But yeah.
I think that was the one I saw because I don't have issues.
Okay, good. But it was interesting I think my favorite part about that debate is when Kent Hovind shows that he doesn't know what a dinosaur is in the first place, despite calling himself Dr. Dino. So yeah, that's so I'm trying to set up a debate with Kent Hovind, and it looks like it probably won't happen. And basically because he wants to have enough information to dox both me and the person I want to debate alongside me. And since neither of us are really willing to give him that much information about ourselves, it's looking like we probably won't have that debate. So if that in fact fails to happen, I'm going to be hosting a little bit of an event surrounding this whole thing. But I want to continue on with the chat. So from Vesta Freya, Seth, you don't seem seem to have, I guess I'll put that in here, any anger towards Young Earth Creationists, which is good, as my husband is a moderator for a suicide watch site, and there are a large number of former Young Earth Creationists on that site.
I can understand why that would be the case, and it's really tragic. I personally am not angry toward any of the people in Young Earth Creationism, although I don't extend that same charity toward a lot of the flat Earth nonsense that the friends of mine espouse. I'm sick of that. But I'm not angry with the people involved. I'm more angry at myself. Every major decision that I made in the past 15 years has been in some way related to my fanaticism for Young Creationism. And I know that was all on me, but it doesn't make me any less angry that, the real world consequences of it are the student loan debt, the fact that I worked for a toxic company for 3 years that didn't pay, barely paid a living wage. They gave me a couple of raises while I was there, but when I left, one of my colleagues left, he'd been there for over 10 years. His wife had brain cancer, and he hadn't gotten a raise in almost 10 years, and he was making about the same as when I left. And his wife was also a veteran of the ministry too. So, it's not a good place to work. And so,
but I'm sure in Christian charity they offered to pay for her medical bills, right?
Right? No.
Oh,
no. They had to sell their house, move in with her family, and it was a really bad situation. She's doing a lot better now, is what I understand.
Man,
but
look,
yeah.
I don't want to say that there's no such thing as, Christian charities and things. Because look, I know of churches and things that have banded together to help out people in those situations. So it's not me trying to say that, Christians aren't generous or anything. Because I know plenty of generous Christians, and I've seen plenty of examples of it. But I think it just drives home that AIG is not, it's not a church, it's not a charity, it's just a business.
Exactly. I've been blessed with, to borrow that term from Christianity, I've been fortunate to know very many wonderful, loving, charitable Christians. And in fact, I would put my parents at the top of the bunch. So I don't think it's anything about Christians, but I have seen several families struggle through incredibly hard times who work there, and one of them is still working there, and AIG has basically done nothing for them to assist.
That doesn't hugely surprise me, and that's one of the things that, I think they try to lie to everyone about it, and they're like, oh, they get the 501c3 status, so they think, oh, well, I guess it's a charity, and they try to use religious exemptions for various laws and things like that. And it's this is just a book selling museum ticket generation thing.
Yeah.
Like this isn't a charity. It's not a church. It's not there to help you. It's there to try and sell you things for money at a tidy profit margin to get you to believe nonsense, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they're good at it. They're really good at it. In fact, every time I've responded to anything from Answers in Genesis, I've had to cut out their commercials because they have tons of commercials. Like, oh, if you'd like to know more, here's a book we sell here at the gift shop.
Well, like going through the Creation Museum, they have, like, if you skip the gift shop when you first walk in, which is meant to be the exit point of the museum, you can get to it from the main level. But if you're going through the museum, you get down to the Answers news, or the Answers, what do they call it now? I can't remember, but anyway, they're a theater down in the end of the museum, and they have an
The Answers News.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not the Answers Center. That's the new theater they built at the Ark. I forget what it's called, but anyway, they have like a giant bookstore there with all these different academic materials that are, I think they rotate to keep them related to whatever topic they're talking about. But then you come up the stairs not too far later, and you come into another gift shop with a lot of the same material, plus a bunch of children's toys and stuff like that. And then the Ark merchandising is everywhere. They have, they just opened the new Answers Center about a year ago, right after I left, and they have a lot of different books and other merchandise there, and that's where you first get off the bus and where you get back on the bus later. Then they have a gift shop in the Ark. They have another gift shop on the second deck. They had they used to have this really cool 3D photo thing where it would actually print out a sandstone 3D model. They got rid of that, I think, for contract reasons or something. But I mean, there's merchandising everywhere you look.
Yeah, I'm sure you could spend several $100s there if you were to engage to the extent that they would like.
Oh yeah.
So S. Bendit asks, AIG is famous or infamously have requirements. I can't read something today. I'm sorry. AIG infamously have required their employees to be young Earth creationists. Do they actually enforce it?
They would like to, but I don't think they really can. People are only as, I mean, anybody can sign a form saying that they agree with something, and
Right.
Anybody who's grown up in a Christian environment can say that they agree with the gospel. The only people who are going to come out and actually say that they disagree, like I did, are people who seriously believe their convictions and hold to them. So like when I told them I had to leave, I could have kept on lying for years and no one would have known that I was a Unitarian, and disagreed with them on a few other theological things. I just did that because I felt compelled to, like it was the right thing to do. But
Yeah.
I know somebody who just recently quit working there, who a year ago told me he wasn't a young Earth creationist. And he just kept working there because it put food on the table, and he was working toward another goal, and he just needed a job in the meantime.
Right. And well, one of the things I think is important to remember is, they have people who are doing like tickets and concessions and cleaning up at the restaurant and things. And I have a hard time believing that, because I'm pretty sure it's mostly like a bunch of like kids doing this stuff, right? Like people get, yeah. Somehow I doubt they found that many people in this little town in Kentucky who were honestly people who were willing to sign the statement of faith. And there's also a code of conduct, isn't there? That also includes lots of things outside of work. Like there's a no extramarital sex and no homosexual activity and all this stuff. And it's like, you did not get everyone.
But yeah, at the Creation Museum, I would say you probably have about a 90% adherence among the staff, because they bring down people to work on the weekends from Cedarville University, which is one of the endorsed Creationist schools.
Okay.
Then a lot of the kids are homeschooled. They have a lot of kids from God's Bible School in Cincinnati, which is Young Earth Creationist college. They have I mean, like there are a lot of people in the Cincinnati area who are believers and Young Earth Creationists, and a lot of them are employees or children of employees. So At the museum, I would say probably most, if not everybody, holds to that view. At the Ark Encounter, it's much more slim pickings. The restaurant staff has always had issues with people behaving in less than good ways, and I've heard similar reports about the zoo staff. There've been a lot of scandals that have just kind of gotten swept under the rugs or under the rug.
Now, are these things that any business would find objectionable, or are these things that, like the Ark in particular, like they violate their particular code of conduct?
More the Ark or any Christian organization, although I would say probably if the things were done on business premises at other places, they'd probably have a problem with it too.
Okay.
Just an idea of what I'm talking about. But AIG usually takes a hard line on it, although I've also heard of cases where people were not actually, like, they never actually got in trouble for it because they were probably related to somebody. I've known people who have gotten reprimanded or even fired for reporting things too. A couple of friends of mine were trying to pursue different injustices that they saw, and in the process angered the wrong people and no longer work there, and not of their own volition.
I see. All right. Well, we also have a question from Trim Tarask. Did you have a cool break room?
The break room at the Ark wasn't that great, but my office was up on the 4th deck, which isn't supposed to exist according to the Bible. But we were up on the 4th deck, directly above the last video they have at the end of the Ark, where you're watching like the modern day version of Mr. Noah giving the reporter a tour of the Ark.
Wait, do they count decks up, going up? Is the first deck the bottom deck?
Yeah, so you walk up this little ramp that's underneath the Ark, and you're on the first deck, and then you've got the second deck, or like the first deck is mostly geared toward animal exhibits, and then a little bit of the created kinds counting that they do. And then you get up to the second deck, and they go more into the science of animal care. They have a lot more animal exhibits up there. That's also where they bring in live animals for a few hours a day. And then on the third deck, they go into more of the science of the flood, rock layers, flooding on Mars, stuff like that. And then they get into the biblical authority. But at the end of deck 2 and deck 3, they have little sitting areas where you can kind of catch a breather, and they have these movies playing. And because of the way it's set up, they have to have the speakers very loud. So there are still parts of it that I can remember very distinctly because we were right above where those movies were. So you could hear them like on repeat 20 or 30 times a day.
Oh, goodness. That sounds like it would drive you crazy.
It was hell. It was horrible. And so anyway, that wasn't exactly our break room, although we had a fridge up there. We had a few different groups, or a few different sets of employees were working there. It was the worst place they could have put our department, though, because everything we needed to do, if there was a system error with our computers, had to be addressed as quickly as possible. And so there was no option in business, and we had to wait on the elevators that they opened up to guests, and we had to wheel a cart from one end of the Ark to the other, take the elevator down, and then wheel it anywhere across the grounds, and usually wait on the buses if we were going down to ticketing. So it was a nightmare.
Nice. Oh, the reason I asked about the numbering of the decks is because you don't number decks from bottom to top. You name them from top to bottom. So the first deck should be the top deck.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, levels on a ship go up.
Well, they start on the first floor because the flow of it is supposed to be, you come in the bottom ramp, you go up to the first floor. The first floor, you go from one end. I can't tell how wide my window is, but you go from one end.
Make it wider.
Oh, it's okay. You go from start to finish, and the next one you go all the way around, and the next one you go all the way around, and then you go down the elevators again to the gift shop. So the flow of it is first, second, third. But then they also have the roof deck that they've been talking about putting a restaurant or a hotel or something like that up there for a long time. They've never done anything with.
Would that be like a new construction, or is it just that little top part that they want to turn into something?
No, it's a pretty big area up there. Right now, they have a bunch of supplies. Well, right now, I should say, last year, they have a bunch of supplies. And like one of the funnier exhibits they have is a display talking about how they would have kept up airflow on the ark, and they have an elephant walking on a treadmill in this video. The treadmill actually exists up there. It's not assembled, but they apparently were planning on doing that with a real animatronic elephant, and couldn't afford it. So
awesome. Well,
yeah, still up there.
That's one of the things that always amused me, because actually, AIG likes to go on about how Noah would probably have to take on, like young animals to keep down on the size and the amount of food. It's like, well, can a young elephant run this treadmill? Because my guess is that they showed an adult elephant.
They showed an adult in the video.
Yeah, it's. Our next question is also from Trim Tarask, who says, "What is your favorite tree?"
Ents.
Ents. Okay, that's a good answer. He also comments, "Bro, you got a sick mustache. I got no question. I only have an intelligence of 3." So
well, thank you. It's a work in progress. I have an asymmetric face, and half of it grows better than the other half, which really pisses me off. But I've been trying to keep it curled evenly for the most part.
Did you see the Leaving Young Earth Creationism I did with my brother?
Yes, yeah, I saw all those comments.
Yep.
Yeah.
So only the finest mustaches for Leaving Young Earth Creationism. I bring you the best in mustaches. Oh yeah.
You gotta grow one if you can.
One of the videos. So I put a mustache on, because of course I can't grow a real mustache because of all the scales. But I did put a mustache on one of the videos. I think it's one of the Creationism and the Big Bang. Like just randomly, I've got a mustache there.
Yeah, well, you've got those little party favors that it looks like a handlebar mustache, but it just sticks right in your nose. They're uncomfortable as heck to wear, but you could totally rock one.
All right, I might look into that. But TD Lane says, I'll just change the person. What is your favorite dinosaur? And then I guess to me, feel free to answer this question too. Your favorite dinosaur?
I would say favorite group of dinosaurs would be theropods.
Okay.
Even before the whole bird connection, before I was willing to acknowledge that they probably had feathers, it just really fascinated me. And now that I'm open to the idea that dinosaurs, or some of the dinosaurs at least, were feathered, like I just can't get it out of my head. The idea of a little little velociraptor chicken kind of thing running around is really visually compelling. So I'd go with that.
Okay. So mine, which is actually something I've mentioned before, I don't know how often, but mine is turkey. The bird. Turkey is my favorite dinosaur, mostly because they're delicious, and I will eat turkey meat pretty much whenever the opportunity presents itself. So I'm a big fan of turkey, just because they're delicious.
That reminds me, when I was a little kid, my dad had this comedian songwriter on tape that we'd listen to in his car, and he had a song about why dinosaurs went extinct, and he said it's because they taste like chicken.
Well, some of them probably did. Mm-hmm. Although every once in a while I've actually gotten that question, and they'll say like, well, what would like a T-Rex have tasted like or something? And I usually say that it probably would have tasted more like an ostrich than a chicken. Yeah.
Don't they have some, I mean, I can't remember if it was collagen or what, but didn't they find some kind of a trace soft mineral or a soft material of not mineral, some kind of a soft tissue that was basically the same as an ostrich? I'm really not.
There was some T-Rex collagen that is presumably original. Well, that is presumably preserved from the original animal that was extremely similar to ostrich and chicken collagen. So Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. I recently came across another headline that apparently Dr. Schweitzer had uncovered something very similar to DNA that is dated to be about 85 million years old. Which,
Yeah.
that's
So,
true.
well, what has happened is there was an ornithopod, I believe it was a hadrosaur, from the late Cretaceous, although not the end Cretaceous. So this would be a little bit earlier than T-Rex. But under a microscope, there were what looked to be the remnants of cells. And so they stained some of these with stains that are known to bind to DNA, and they bound to what looked like the nucleus of these cells.
Oh, wow.
So, but the thing is, like everything in science, you have to be careful and say, okay, we found something that binds to stains that bind to DNA, but those stains don't just bind to DNA, they bind to other things too. And it's in such small amounts, it's going to be hard to actually recover DNA molecules to check to see if this is actually DNA. So right now, it's still very preliminary, but there is some basic evidence to indicate that there may have been some DNA recovered, but it would have, even if that is the case, it'll be fragmentary, and it's unlikely that you could actually sequence it into any useful thing. And Taco asks, I believe referring to the whole you being able to hear the movies through the floor, was it as bad as It's a Small World after all?
It was horrible. The original movie they had playing up there was this interview that their Noah character had with a reporter right before the flood, and every 25 to 30 minutes or so, you would hear her scream in this shrill fake British accent, "There's no flood!" And I'm kind of losing your voice, so it might not have sounded right, but she says, "There's no flood." And it's so obnoxious, and I will never be able to get that out of my head. And even when they moved it down to the second deck and put a new video up on deck 3, I could still hear her say that if there was a quiet moment where the video was lined up just right.
Oh man, that's annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would hate that. Trim Trask asks, what's your favorite kind of music and favorite fast food joint?
Ooh, fast food. I try to avoid it. I'm trying to regain my health, but I would probably say if I'm gonna give in and splurge, it would either be Taco Bell or Arby's. And then favorite music, depends on the mood. If it's a really nice, beautiful day out and the sun's shining and I feel like going for a drive, I'll probably throw in some death metal or screamo. If it's more of a quiet, chill day at home, I'll probably be listening to George Winston piano or some kind of a folk music.
Okay. And T. Lane responds to your statement about dinosaurs. Says, well, that's a good choice. One of my favorite dinosaurs is Corvus corax, but then he makes a little bit of a mistake and says, otherwise known as crows/ravens. Corvus corax is the common crow. It does not refer to ravens. That is a genus and species, man. Man, you know what? I'm just gonna have to go ahead and say that the Primarch of the Raven Guard, Legion, would be very disappointed in you. And if you get that reference, then you are a gigantic nerd, just like me. Let's see. Oh, I misclicked. Not that I don't want to show Illuminati Don's chat, but Vandali 1990 says, if we ever did regrow dinosaurs like Jurassic Park, do you think we could grow them for food? Sauropods would feed a lot of people. I think the problem there is, would you get more meat per unit of feed than you get out of a cow? And I would go ahead and say probably not significantly.
I don't think you could grow enough food in our current climate to be able to feed them in most environments. Like maybe if you repurposed a lot of agriculture for whatever kind of plants that they would have eaten, but I would be surprised if we had enough to feed them on a mass scale to be able to grow them for food.
Yeah, and also I think one of the problems with especially sauropods would just be, how do you keep one? Like, where do you put it physically?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, cows are already pretty big, but we can contain them effectively. I don't know that you can do that with. And Clay Corbin points out a correction, which, by the way, always correct me if I get something wrong, because it happens. It's common raven. Yeah, it is common raven. And then Evil Scotsman, who of course gets the reference, says, "Woo, 40K." So Trim Trask asks, was the Ark well insulated or well ventilated?
Not our office area. They had a pretty robust AC system, heating system, and they improved it over time. Like they used to have insulating plastic curtains that would hang down when you at the entrance where you'd walk in, and they eventually upgraded to sliding glass doors, if I remember right. So actually, don't quote me on that because it's been a while since I've seen that part. But the interior where the guests were was very well insulated and ventilated. Our office area was not. It was originally a storage room, and they just decided to throw us up there because they needed extra space. And so we had to, in the summer, they had to bring in a mobile AC unit, pump all the air out, and then in the winter they had a heating unit. Well, there were, I don't know if it was a budgetary issue or what, but the original units that we had broke down, and there were significant portions of summer and winter both where we didn't have adequate heating or cooling. And one of my colleagues had was pretty sensitive to temperature due to an accident they had where he kind of a, I think it was some kind of a brain injury he had, and it really impacted his ability to work up there. Like it was not a good environment to work.
Yeah.
Until they were able to bring in the units again. But it took them a long time before they brought those back.
Well, that's one of the things that I always found was amusing is because if you look at because there's that concrete structure behind the facade of the Ark.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look up there, there's really big climate control boxes that are set up. There were big vents and fans going through. And if you look carefully, at least when I've looked carefully through footage, I'm sure you noticed while working there, there are ventilation ducts all over the place. It's because the structure wouldn't be survivable without ventilation because it doesn't have sufficient ventilation as an Ark, which is, and I always thought it's like, don't people notice that the fact that you need all of this ventilation is a problem for the Ark as a story? Like, how did Noah have a modern 21st century ventilation system with electrical fans?
We know what technology they have. They lived 1,000 years or almost 1,000 years, so they could have invented anything.
I guess that's.
I'm really surprised that God didn't just tell him to go up to the moon.
Well, it wouldn't flood there.
Mm-hmm.
If the world flooded today, would the Ark work? I'm going to go ahead and say no. To be fair, though, it was never intended to be a seaworthy vessel, so I guess there's that. Although it is funny, did you hear that they had some trouble where their insurance wasn't paying for flood damage to the Ark?
Yes, it wasn't to the Ark; it was to the tram road leading there because either the company they originally hired or somebody at AIG decided to cut corners to save money, and the road, like as you're going down, the asphalt literally had places where it was pushed down, and you'd have these terrible bumps going down the road.
Okay.
It was just horrible driving down it, and it took them 1.5 years or so before they actually started to tear it up and replace it.
Apparently, we've now started a 40K fight because now Taco is going on about Salamander Vulcan being the best Primarch. I don't know, man. I don't know. Vulcan's pretty good.
I'm not familiar with this. Is that a?
Oh my goodness, it's extremely nerdy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a sci-fi franchise run by Games Workshop, a British company, and there is decades worth of lore. So, if you ever want to do a deep dive about a fictional universe, you can dive into the Warhammer 40K lore.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that term. Is it as bad as learning Elvish for 3 years?
Well, it doesn't require as much dedicated study in the same way as learning a language, but I would say there's probably more lore recorded for Warhammer 40K than there is for Middle-earth.
Okay.
Now, part of that is just that numerous authors have been adding to it over decades. So, I mean, just the sheer volume of stuff there is going to be higher than anything that one guy could have put out. Then the Evil Scotsman says he's a close second to Magnus. I don't know, man. Magnus, look, even before you get there, all of your Space Marines are mutating into horrible monstrosities. It's time to pack it in. It was never meant to be, man. what is your favorite miracle in the Bible?
Ooh, favorite. I have never thought about that before. Oh, that is a really good question. I honestly couldn't say for sure. I don't think we really got into it too much, but I'm a pretty skeptical agnostic right now, and so I don't know if I would want to rank any of them as favorites, just because I'm pretty convinced that the evidence that they ever happened is non-existent. So, as far as favorites, though, I mean, breaking it up into Old or New Testament, it's really hard to say. I have no idea.
Okay. Well, I think if I were to pick one, it would be turning water into wine, because I like that Jesus was like, yeah, let's keep the party going.
Well, and once you look into the Jewish cultural context of that, that was really a I'm not sure which group he was exactly trying to offend, but he was trying to piss people off with that if it actually happened, because the water vessels that he used were ritual bathing vessels that were kind of a substitute for running water in a lot of their ceremonies. So he basically rendered them useless, and it was kind of attacking the whole religious significance of them. And they're these massive like stone jugs that are dug out of the ground and carved out of stone. It's not just like a clay pot that they made.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's see. We get this comment from Wobbly Nostrils, which I like that name. The dimensions of the ark would not work today, or would not work even today. Let alone get all those animals and their food on. Yeah. So every once in a while, I've been thinking I should schedule some kind of stream or something, maybe with another content creator, maybe like Erica from Gut Sick Gibbon or something, and just do like a deep dive for like hours about all of the reasons that we know the whole story of the flood and Noah's Ark just is impossible. I've come to realize that basically it's essentially impossible to run out of reasons that the flood story couldn't have happened. Every time you look at something else, it's like, oh, here's another reason.
Well, aren't you aware? I think it was that Japanese team of nautical researchers who plotted the ark and said that it would have been the perfect dimensions to float. Something like back in the, I think.
I'm not aware of that.
I don't know anything about it beyond what I just said, but I've heard it touted by AIG and some of their articles about how some team of researchers basically proved that the ark was the best vessel for surviving a flood because of its dimensions.
I mean, I wouldn't be horribly surprised to see that it would stay up, like, and it wouldn't sink. But I don't think that it would be at all suitable for carrying thousands upon thousands of animals and having them all being taken care of by 8 people. In fact, one of the things that I'm going to get into in my Noah's Zookeeper series, which is the new one I just premiered this past Thursday, is that if you look at a modern zoo, and I use the San Diego Zoo as an example, like how much surface area per animal do they use? What kind of staff do they have? And how many animals do they have? And then compare that to what AIG is claiming for the ark.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think that it's reasonable to have 8 people taking care of all of these animals for a year with all of this food. And I go into like, how much food, how much does the San Diego Zoo spend on food for the animals? Because it's in the tens of millions.
Oh,
They have delivered constantly, because it turns out animals eat. So yeah, like the whole idea just doesn't work out. And TD Lane points out, if you want to dive into 40K lore, go watch some 40K theories lore for newcomer series. I'll agree with that. If you want to go in the deep dive, that's a good place to start.
Okay.
Let's see. Dapper Dino could use water into wine for his Kent with Bent. Actually, the episode where I did actually drink wine, it's too easy for me to drink wine too fast. I realized that I can't really do wine. And the reason I got it is because basically it meant that I didn't ever have to like get up and go get a new drink. I could just pour this room temperature red wine into a glass and be done with it. But yeah, man, the next day was way too rough. We got a super chat from Jens van Broekhoven, who says, do the deep dive. Oh, goodness. Thanks, Jens. That's not entirely what I meant, or at all what I meant, but yeah. Okay, thanks. But I'll just take that as an indication that we should in fact do a stream about how impossible Noah's Ark is. So thanks for the €5, Jens. I really do appreciate it. What's your favorite snack? And do you have a favorite video or board game?
Favorite snack? Probably just like mixed nuts or something. I don't know. Favorite board or popcorn, that too. Favorite board game. I really like Catan. But there's one game I played with my family back at Thanksgiving. I don't know the name of it, but you are the Knights of the Round Table, and it's kind of like playing a video game on a board game style. Like you go out, you have these different objectives. You have to get the Holy Grail. You have to fight off these dragons. You have to do all these different things, and like every single turn that you take, you have to do something positive and negative to your group. And so no matter what steps you do, you're always fighting against yourself. And you also, there's one character who might be playing for the other side, although you don't know that for sure.
Okay.
So it's a really fascinating game. I don't know the name of it, but it's probably my favorite board game.
All right. Awesome. That sounds really cool. I'm not familiar with it, but I also am very partial to Settlers of Catan. Although every once in a while I can manage to get a actual game of Space Hulk going, and that's always fun. Which, by the way, is a 40K board game. So there you go. As far as favorite snacks, I tend to be partial to popcorn. Although sometimes I'll have chips, but popcorn is probably the answer. Although I don't really eat it very much at all. So Maya has wine, so I am neither surprised that you have wine, nor am I terribly jealous. I'm a little jealous. I wish I had a little bit of wine. Well, actually, I don't want wine right now. The drinking on stream is just for Kent with Bent. Because if I'm going to live debunk Kent Hovind, I'm going to have some extra help with that.
I don't know how you can get through it otherwise.
Exactly. Eric Virataler 92 asks, what did I miss? I just joined. So you want to start from the beginning again, Seth?
I'm down. I mean,
no, I don't think we're going to do that.
I hadn't mentioned this yet, but I've got two roommates. One of them works at the ARC for AV, and the other works for the ARC in the zipline course, and is also going to be a pastor soon. So I made sure that both of them were working today before scheduling this.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah. So we don't run past like 4:30 when one of them might come in.
So I think we sort of touched on this, but we'll go through it a little bit more clearly. And I think this may be the last question because we are coming up on 2 hours, and that's where I usually like to cut them off if I try not to go too much past 2 hours, basically. So from Eric Virataler 92, how do you interpret the flood of Adam and Eve? The flood and Adam and Eve now that you're no longer a YEC?
Well, I'm not exactly a theist either anymore, so I would interpret them mostly as myth, but on a theological level, and this was kind of what led me down the path of eventually inventing YEC. I was trying to look into more of a priestly interpretation, and there's I think it's either Babylonian or Ugaritic myth where Adam is basically created as this priest for humankind, and humans already existed, which you can derive that out of Genesis 1 and 2, and then Adam is created later. And so I was trying to build this understanding of the Garden of Eden was this temple, and Adam and Eve were created to serve in the garden as priests for the rest of humanity. And then after they were basically tricked into losing their spot, then the rest of the story of the Bible is about rebuilding this priesthood. And you can get a pretty consistent narrative about that. Then when you get to the flood, I've heard, I haven't looked into this too much yet, but I've heard that the dimensions of the ark are pretty similar to it, or are kind of supposed to be imagery of a temple. And the floodwaters crashing down and consuming the earth, with the idea that waters and ocean and Leviathan are representations of chaos. It could be seen as God allowing the chaos of the primordial world to take over before he recreates this new world. So he sets aside these people as the new humans, and these creatures to be the new animals in this new world. And it's like a redo of the creation event. So theologically, I understand them as, in terms of rebuilding the priesthood that was lost, but literally, I don't think there's any validity to them.
Okay. So we do have a quick question from Illuminati Don, which was, did you know of Kent Hovind when you were young Earth Creationism or young Earth Creationist? And I think you said that you did sort of towards the end of that period, right?
Yeah, I heard a little bit about him, but one of the first things I ever heard of him, where I heard him speak, was this video Paulo Gia did, where he took Kent and Eric talking together, and separate talks, and they were saying the exact same things. Like Eric just Kent's speech, and that was one of the first videos I saw when I was exploring this, and I realized that there's no scientific validity to any of this if your talking points don't change in 30 years.
Right. Yeah. All right. And I think now we're going to go up with, we're going to get a few channel update things. So right now, Tuesday is going to be Kent with Bent 19. It looks like it's going to be titled Requiem for Hovind. So that will be at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So because of the time change, again, remember, things are going to be a little different in the next few months. Tuesday, I am not sure. I will be consulting with my patrons as to what they would prefer. But I'm either going to be debuting a video about the anatomy of the skeletal anatomy of dinosaurs, or the next episode of Noah's Zookeeper. So it'll be one of those two things. I'm not sure what Saturday will bring. If I have another Leaving Young Earth Creationist or Creationism, it will be that. Otherwise, it will be a video premiere. And then, of course, the Tuesday after is yet another Kent with Ben. So, right now I'm trying to stick to a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule where things are coming out on the channel on those days. It might end up getting cut back to 2 a week for a little bit because I have some things I need to take care of in the coming weeks. So, there's that. I do not currently have anyone scheduled for another Leaving Young Earth Creationism, but that can always change because basically my email is always available to people for that. Will we be seeing Seth in the future? I can't guarantee it, but I have no opposition to seeing Seth in the future.
I would be happy to come back, but I don't know if I'm the most qualified to be able to contribute to this discussion. Okay. I know enough about young Earth creationism still that I could probably provide more insight into what they hold, but I don't. I'm so behind scientifically. I had no idea, and that's probably the thing that frustrates me the most about all of this is just how much I didn't know. Yeah,
I believe me, I know the feeling. So let's see. Illuminati Don, who is in the chat, has been working on setting up a fan Discord server for me. So that will be my second Discord server. I have a patron-only Discord server, and if you want access to that, link in the description. The $1 membership tier will get you access to the patron-only Discord server, which is where I post things like links to videos that you can see early as a patron. You can get to see like early thumbnail art. You can get to you can make requests. Unless you're at the $50 or over tier, I haven't said that I will absolutely honor a request from you, but I do take advice and suggestions. So the fan server is going to be open, as far as I know, to anyone. At least that's what I would like for it to be. And Illuminati Don is heading that up. So when he gets to me that is set in a way that he thinks will work, I'm letting him take the lead on that. Then I will start linking it in the descriptions and people can join. Let's see. Is there anything else?
Well, I wanted, if I could, I wanted to comment on what Taco wrote a few minutes ago. He said he had a unique eisegesis. I would challenge and say that there is no real such thing as exegesis with the Bible, which, coming from a biblical literalist position, is a little bit hard for me to say. But the people who say you have to read the Bible only are not reading the Bible only. But when you get to the New Testament, there are centuries of tradition informing how you understand who Jesus was. And if you read the New Testament just on its own, it's almost impossible to get a lot of the theology out of there that most Christians espouse. And then when you get to the Old Testament, like, if you don't have some idea of the cultural context, there is no way that you can read it and come to anything similar to what the Hebrews originally believed. So that's what I was saying I was trying to do, based on some of the other cultural myths around the area of the Middle East, is trying to incorporate some of what they believed to build a more robust understanding of the Adam and Eve story, the flood narrative, all of that. I figured they probably have something to inform and fill in the gaps that the Bible doesn't include.
Okay. And the only other thing I can think of before we head out is I noticed that we have apparently a fairly significant grouping of 40K fans. So if you want, get with me and we can do some kind of 40K content over on my my other channel, which is Top Hats Off. There's a link to it at the end of most of my videos. It's one of the featured channels on my channel page. So if you want to go check out over there, I just do all sorts of random crap over there. Like, anytime I feel like I want something to be on the internet, but it's not on topic for this channel, it tends to go on that channel. It doesn't have a regular upload schedule, and there's never a guarantee that anything I start is ever going to be finished, because it's just the complete random nonsense that I want to do goes up there. But if people wanted to have a discussion where we have like the debate, who's the best Primarch, I will host a debate on who's the best Primarch. I'll 100% host that debate. You guys want to argue whether it's Korra or Corvus Corax, or someone wants to take Magnus, Petrarabo, Mortarion? I don't care. Go for it. Although I do want someone to argue for Alfarius, because I want to see what you can come up with that you can actually say for certain about him. So that'll be interesting, or would be interesting if anyone did it. But Illuminati says the server should be done soon. He's going to be working on it tonight. So that's awesome. Once that's up, yeah. So I think that's so you need a 40K channel on your fan Discord server is what you're saying. I mean, that's fine by me. I wouldn't mind. Who's going to be who's going to be the hipster arguing for Robot Gilliman? My guess is no one. The only people who really like Robot Gilliman are like the actual Games Workshop employees, and I don't know why. I think they're paid to like him. Which again, sorry, Seth. I know that, and all of that whole thing just went right over your head.
I get it though. I can appreciate nerdiness.
Yes, you can be extremely nerdy about 40K, or you can just play like the games and blow people up, which is another option. So yeah, if people want to do some 40K stuff, let me know. My email is available. If people actually want to do a Primarch debate, we'll do it. But I think that's it from me. Thank you so much, Seth, for coming. It was really interesting to talk to you, and it was great to have someone who has some firsthand experience with like the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum and whatnot. That's been really interesting to me. But yeah, I'll see everybody on. Well, hey, actually, I'll see you all in a few hours on Vandalia 1998's channel. So be around for that because that'll be fun. All right, I'll see everyone then, and also on Tuesday for Kent with Bent. So talk to y'all later. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.
Yeah, thank you.